Welcome to the Plant Cunning Podcast,
where we explore a relationship to plants, other people, and the mysteries of nature.
Coming to you from the high Allegheny Plateau in central New York.
We are your hosts, AC Stauble
and Isaac Hill. Okay, so welcome to another special edition of the Plant Cunning Podcast. We're going to do the year ahead forecast with ZamboniFunk. And this year ahead, it's both very big. There's a lot of big things. A lot of the outer planets are changing sign. All of the outer planets are changing sign. But this quarter, the winter quarter, is not really super. There's not a lot going on. So the plan for this episode is kind of just to do an overview of the whole year, and then we'll talk a little bit about this first quarter coming up, and then in April when we get back together, we're going to do like a really in-depth, look at charts and do everything for the Aries ingress, which is the start of the astrological year, is really the Aries ingress of the sun. So, but this is kind of like the last quarter of the astrological year and the first quarter of the calendar year, but there's not so much going on, but there's a lot going on
soon enough.
Yes. So Zamboni, how are you doing? How's your year been?
Hey y'all. Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. It has been quite a year for me. It's been a year of I've made some major accomplishments. I've got my astrology course, Astrology from the Ground Up. I did that twice, and that'll be coming out for purchase like at any point. That will be coming up pretty soon, and that feels like a pretty major accomplishment for me. And so it's been super busy. I've had a lot going on, been working and leaning into teaching and things like this. And trying to this past year, I hit 10,000 readings, which was a major milestone of mine. I had been working toward that for several years. And
I thought it was going to take you so much longer. When I first learned you were doing that a few years ago, I was just like, that seems like such a big number, but I can't believe you did it so fast.
Yeah, well, we live in unprecedented times, like now that there are apps and, apps that have a bunch of people who are interested in astrology, like looking casually at their phone about like looking for readings. And then also robots will calculate charts for me. So I don't have to do any of the, if I was in the 2nd century when a lot of this was developed, then it's all happening by hand. And I've got to memorize a bunch of tables and stuff like this. Like 10,000 probably doesn't happen in a lifetime at that point. But now, like, all I got to do is type in some information and then just get straight to reading. So it's possible to do at all. And I kept swinging that bat. So
good job.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's been pretty momentous this year, I feel like.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah, I always like this new year time period is a great time for looking back and seeing like what we've done and what we want to do better in the next year too. But you made some predictions this year, and you scored some home runs too. So we want to talk about that, like what your predictions have looked like in this last year, and any particular predictions that you want to gloat or.
I certainly don't want to gloat, but it's been.
You can done all right. Gloat every once in a while,
Sure. What I always say is I feel like I'm doing better than chance, and so that's what I want. Nobody does better than about 70%. You know what I mean? You get a bunch of stuff wrong when you try to predict the future, and that's just what it is. No humans do better than that. But I do better than chance, and so it's been pretty good as far as that's concerned. Again, I just do this a lot. So, but one of the things that I've been thinking about is the day of the presidential election, I made a video predicting that Trump was going to win, and Trump went on to win. And so that one, when it comes to predictions, the best predictions that can be made are the ones that, or the very best predictions when we evaluate predictions, the ones that are the best are the ones that are most accurate. So they are more accurate than other predictions were, and they are further out in time. And so in the case of this prediction, I won a coin toss, basically. I had two real options that it could have been. So, it could have been one or the other. And then I made that prediction on the day of. And
Yeah.
so that was pretty close in time. And so I got some press about that prediction. I did a pretty good job with that, but like it wasn't my strongest prediction ever. And one thing that I think is really interesting about that is my Instagram followers tanked that day.
Oh,
They
And
tank.
so, yeah, they tanked. Yeah, I lost a whole bunch of Instagram followers that day, which
Not
is
me.
like
I'm so
whatever. I don't
sorry.
really care about my follower count,
Yeah.
but I do think that it's an interest. I think that it was read as an endorsement. And so
right.
I
Oh.
have a
Yeah.
bunch of people who don't support Trump in my audience and who saw
Mhm.
my prediction and read it as an endorsement of Trump
I
and
see.
then like got off my page or whatever. And so it's important to remember that when we're making these kinds of predictions, then the goal is to be more accurate, right? The best predictions are the ones that are more accurate than other predictions are. And so
Mhm.
I could have made any kinds of predictions. So if my prediction was in line with what I had wanted, then I probably would have predicted like a Cornell West victory or something like that. That would have
Nice.
been a stupid prediction to make, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like Cornell West wins the presidency. No one thought Cornell West did not think that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
But now that you mention it, let's push that forward. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you have to be, you want to be accurate. You want to
Yeah.
actually predict well,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah,
part of the
exactly.
point.
You
You
want to
know?
be accurate, right? Exactly. You want to be accurate with your predictions, and so that's a good thing to do. But then, so it got me thinking about like the emotional response that comes with predictions a lot of times. And like the last quarterly that we did, I remember finishing that and being like, man, all I talked about was things being bleak for so long. And
Yeah.
it was like 2 hours and it was like, it was doomy, and
Yeah.
I sort of like felt bad at the end of that and wondered like how to really think with this craft. And I
Yeah.
think one thing that's important to do is to remember that what we are looking at, what we're trying to do with this prediction, with like, especially like these long astrological predictions where we're looking at months or years at a time, is we're trying to sketch out a shape. And as we sort of like get into a description of what the shape of things is, then we can position ourselves in such a way as to live more harmoniously with that shape, right?
Mhm.
So the goal is to live better. The goal is to know what's going to happen so that we can position ourselves in a place where we can thrive. The goal is thriving more
Yeah.
than anything else is, right?
Yeah.
And so it's important to be right, but like I think that we can sometimes lead toward a kind of negativity bias or something like that. And, and so it'll feel more right if you are, realist or whatever, right? Like just like negative all about everything. And, so if I go on to predict that like war is going to escalate or that, the things get more uncomfortable from the perspective, from like an economic perspective or something like that, I'll probably be like good with those predictions. Those are right. You know what I mean? But, if we can think, part of the elegance of astrology in general is its ability to qualitatively describe the situation and as such maybe provide some opportunities for moving toward a kind of thriving. And so when we're looking at these kinds of predictions, like the president you didn't want got elected or something like that, or you think that's going to happen beforehand, then, like there are some ways of orienting ourselves in reference to the shape of this information that I think is really important to center all the time.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I think it's also really important, as astrologers, to words have power, to know that.
Hmm.
And you can be sometimes like you don't want to create something with your words that is harmful, and
Hmm.
I've done that in the past, and like like it made me realize how careful I have to be with my words, and
Hmm.
that goal of being careful with your words and not lying, not saying anything that's untrue, saying things that are true, but saying them in a way that is helpful and helps you build towards what you want. I think is a skill that is important to develop for astrologers and healers in general. And also, like in the tradition that I study in this Vedic tradition, a lot of people look at Vedic astrology as very pessimistic. They're always like,
Mhm.
A little harsh
it's
sounding.
harsh. It can be very harsh.
Yeah,
There's curses. There's all these problems. You're seeing all the problems, and it's also you need to be able to see the problems in order to address the problems too. You know,
sure.
you feel like if you're a doctor, you need to be able to describe the disease so that you can help heal it. And if you're looking at the chart as a map of the karma, you need to be able to see where the problems are coming from, so you can help address those. But
Hmm.
it's also like there's a difference between like talking shop amongst astrologers and like looking at the technicalities of what's going on, and then talking to the person that you're
Yeah.
advising or it's very
For
it's very
sure.
different.
I
But then
was
the other thing about that too is like as you develop as an astrologer in my tradition they talk about you gaining siddhi, mastery and
mm,
of astrology and of prediction. And as you gain siddhi, your words have more power, you know, and also like the ability to see something to make predictions increases. And that's the kind of thing where it's like we can look back and make predictions very easily or see how things fit together, but making a prediction in advance is just so much more powerful because like, one part in particular, like looking back at when Trump got shot in, like there
mhm,
was that conjunction on Algol, which was
mhm,
conjunct Trump's MC. So it's like looking back, you could have easily made a prediction that there could be an assassination attempt, because it's like this Aries energy, this Algol is the head, there's Mars, there's violence, there's, Uranus, a sudden unexpected event. Like, but you would have to have serious Siddhi to be able to make that specific of a prediction, though it's possible to,
Austin Kopik made that
but he
prediction,
didn't make it
and
that
not
specific,
he knew there would be violence, but not an assassination attempt on Trump specific. But
Yeah.
yeah,
But
yeah, it,
yeah.
and
But
like think about words as power too. Like words are super powerful. Like we use them in petitions for healing, and like part of the healing is the actual words. Like this herb, even picking an herb, like this herb is going to heal, the people or this particular person, and that's like part of the medicine.
yeah.
mhm.
And words are powerful, and also like shapes are powerful. Like you kind of started to talk about shapes a little bit, but like there's so much power in shapes. You talked about that on your Instagram recently.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, I've been going real hard with shape recently and
Yeah.
like thinking into I think that shape is kind of the fundamental layer of the world. Like what we do with astrology is we measure time, but time is a measurement of the relationship between objects and space, which
Mhm.
is very noticeable because like daytime is when the sun is up and nighttime is when the sun is down, and that's our most fundamental measure of time. But really what that is a spatial measurement. Where is the sun, right? And so then
Totally.
what we do with astrology is we notice what shape the sky is in, and
Hmm.
then we can notice what happens as a result of that shape as well. And then, so like I can talk about shape endlessly because I think it's the main thing that we have going on. But then also, you can look at like the shape of a narrative or,
Mhm.
Yes.
words can create shapes in
Mm.
the ways that we think about things as well, and in the ways that we operate and interact with one another. Like relationships have shapes, and the ways that we communicate have shapes and waves, like even like radio waves and
Yeah,
all that stuff.
vibration. I was just picturing a frog in the water, like humming, and like,
Hmm.
this wave like motion, these shapes of the water take hold.
Hmm. Yeah, and the frog in the water, that's a real good one, Or I sometimes think about surfing, right? Like
Mhm.
riding the wave
Yeah,
is,
that's a good one.
yeah, that's what we're here to do,
That's what we're
right?
doing,
And
right?
Riding the
so,
wave. Yeah.
Riding the wave, the astro waves.
yeah, the waves of time, it's shaped in a certain kind of way. And so, can you get up there and have this adventure that's so exhilarating? Also an option is to fall in and die, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot that we can do with this time and this body and in this shape with
Yeah.
that shape. And so, like, how are we going to do it?
Mhm.
And like, yeah, and like tacking your sails, like being able to
Mm,
use the weather that you see coming in order to go in the direction that you want to, but working with that weather because fighting against it, you're just going to be ruined. Um,
hmm
and then the other thing is about shapes, like looking at the the esoteric view of the world where we have these levels of consciousness and of reality. You know, when
mm,
we can see like the material world is kind of in a way at the bottom. It's the full creation. It's the crown. It's even not the crown. It's the throne. It's the Malkuth. It's what is created. But as you go up in levels, you go up through the mind and the astral, and like we could talk about Plato's the realm of the forms of the Platonic forms, and to me that's that shape. But
hmm
Hmm.
the shape comes down through the mind, through images, and then into reality. And so by understanding the shapes, you're kind of going to this higher level of form, you know, and then catching that wave as it's coming down the plains
And that's like
into
how
mm,
manifestation.
sigil magic might work too. Like, if,
One of
yeah,
the ways, yeah.
yeah.
hmm Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I've really been thinking a lot about. So I've got like this idea about shape as the main thing that sort of generates the physical, observable life that we live. But you're right that it does come from somewhere. The shape comes from somewhere, right? And it's sort of there's like a primordial sea, right, of chaos, of chaotic potential where dreams come from. Sometimes I've been thinking about, the difference between dreams and thoughts is that dreams are come unbidden, right? And so
Mm.
then there, and even if you are good at navigating dreams, like let's say that you're nice with lucid dreaming or something like that, you still don't get to choose which dream you're in. You're in this dream and then you can sail, right? You can be like, okay, we're going to do something different than this. I'm going to fly away or something like that, right? I'm going to turn, things are going to be different. I'm going to like conjure, like I saw a meme recently about some dude conjuring an Xbox menu and pressing quit and then like waking himself up this way. You know what I
Perfect.
mean?
I love
Right.
it.
Exactly. This is prime time. This is what we want to do with things, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is that those dreams, the thought of the thing, like even a thought, right? That comes from the dream, comes from the metaphor, comes from this primordial, chaotic, it's the difference between the yin and the yang, right? So if yang is waking life and where we live with the corporeal forms and we touch things and all this kind of stuff, then the yin is going to be that area that is dark and chaotic and no one knows what's there. But then you come to know what's there because it sort of like flows up through thought and action and turning into stuff, right? And so part of the reason why I've been thinking so deeply about that is because Neptune is changing signs this year.
Mm.
And
Okay.
so I have been thinking about Neptune as the wellspring of dreams.
Yeah. Okay.
Makes
And
sense.
so as Neptune, so Neptune is this planet that has to do with it's a very slow moving planet. It takes about 14 years to go through a sign, right? And so there's something kind of generational about that. There's
Mhm.
something that 14 years in human bodies, like you can reproduce at age 14. You know what I mean? Maybe you
Mhm.
shouldn't, but like your body is capable of doing that thing, right? And so there is a generation that is encapsulated there. So there's this long moving, slow moving piece that, and Neptune is going to be associated with dreams or with things that are boundless or imaginary in the way that they operate, right? Neptune is famously difficult to even describe in an astrological reading because it just defies description. It defies form or boundary. Like that's just part of its nature, right? And so I've been thinking of Neptune as this wellspring of dreams that sort of like makes it, because it moves so slowly, it becomes this thing that like the thoughts and actions that take place during a particular time frame are centered in this context of the dream, right? The dream that you can't necessarily change or shift, right? You got to ride the wave that you're here in, right? Neptune is going to be associated with like the ocean, the deep ocean and the waves that are associated with that, right? So again, with our surfing image here. And so because Neptune is the wellspring of dreams, then when it moves from a sign such as Pisces to a next sign such as Aries, in this case, that's what's happening this year, is in March, Neptune is going to move from Pisces into Aries. Then the bottom of that well shifts from Pisces things. So the dreams are going to stop being so Pisces and start being so Aries and start, well, the basic zeitgeist, the cultural form where our dreams and ideas come from is going to come from the Aries place instead of the Pisces place. Does that make sense?
Such sense.
Yeah. So like Neptune is the soup, the primordial soup, where the images they're coming, the shapes and the images are coming from. And
The
that
sea
that
of potential.
yeah, I like that metaphor. And so in whereas it's been in Pisces, so it's been more the spiritual and these kind of things. These are the images coming from the unconscious, because like Neptune could also be the unconscious, right?
Sure.
Like the collective unconscious. That's where like so it's influencing the dreams of everybody in the culture, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So and then so it's changing into this Aries sign. So we may be seeing more. And I've seen Austin talk about this in terms of like Austin Coppock, the hero impulse
Mm-hmm.
is going to be coming a lot more, and wars. And we look at Aries, yeah, it's a hero and it's war. It's this
Hot
yeah,
versus the Pisces wet,
yeah. Pisces is more the cosmic ocean of enlightenment or and love and those kind of things in a way. But now we're getting into this Aries. So yeah, so what do you see in terms of that change?
Mm-hmm. So Neptune, excuse me, Neptune, we're gonna get it this time. Third time's a charm. All right. Neptune is a modern planet. It's one of the ones that you need a telescope to see. So it is not incorporated into Hellenistic astrology or any of the ancient ways of doing astrology. So Neptune does not follow the dignity scheme, which is
Yeah.
to say that it doesn't rule any particular sign, right? Modern astrologers sometimes say that Neptune rules Pisces. I don't like that personally. I prefer Jupiter in charge of Pisces. I think it gives Pisces greater breadth and also just like if stuff is going on in somebody's life in a house that is in Pisces, then looking at Jupiter, like Jupiter is going to move around and operate on a much more human, like singular human life time scale than Neptune will, because Neptune moves so slowly. So I prefer Jupiter as the ruler of Pisces. However, yeah, what's up, Isaac?
Well, in Vedic astrology, we have the nodes co-ruling signs. So
Mm.
you can have like a Neptune as a co-ruler and still use Jupiter as the main ruler if you wanted. But
If you
I
wanted to do that, you could
yeah.
do that. But I'm going to propose
Neptune doesn't
instead.
really want to be like boxed in, it seems like. So
This is true. This is
Yeah.
very true. The way that I often think about Neptune is okay, so if you think about the way that signs work, it's you can think of them as like a kind of region where there are certain customs or values or traditions, there conventions in a certain area. And so, or you can think about it as like a dwelling place, like a home, right? So in your home, you rule the roost in your home, and so things are arranged in a way that works for you, and you've got your resources around that are really good for you, and you don't have stuff that doesn't work well for you, right? And this kind of thing, right? So like I'm tall, for example, and so I keep things on the top shelf, and I don't keep a step stool, right? Because that works well for me. And then sometimes every once in a while, somebody short will come over and be like, what the fuck am I supposed to do with this? And like, and it's because that person is not, it doesn't rule the roost in that place, right? And so that's the way that signs work so signs are ruled by a certain planet. And then when other planets are in that place, then they either like it a lot or they don't like it as much, right? And so that's a way to think about it. So the position of exaltation is, and shout out to Adira Oslin for this one. The idea is very much like being at your best friend's place.
Ah.
And so when you're at your homie's place like this, then you can be comfortable. Y'all are vibing, like the things that they have at the crib are things that you would like to have, right? Like it is well set up for you, but you don't have the responsibility of that place. You are not paying bills there, but it's cute. You can go in the fridge if you want to, like the things feel comfortable and easy. And so I like to think of Neptune, which does not follow the traditional rulership scheme. I'm making this up. This is all me. But
Okay.
I like to think of Neptune as sort of like exalted in Pisces.
Yeah.
So Pisces really supports what Neptune wants to do. Neptune is dreamy and imaginative, and there's no boundaries and all this kind of stuff, right? If we think about Pisces as deep ocean dynamics, and where there might be sea monsters down there and stuff, it's like a primordial soup, right? Like nothing is more primordial soup than the ocean itself, right? Like this is a way for us to think about what Pisces is, and then we put Neptune in there, and Neptune's like, great, I love this, right?
Yeah.
More primordial soup for me, no boundaries, none of that sort of stuff, right?
Yes.
So Neptune does really well there in Pisces at doing the Neptune things of being imaginative and not really sure what's going on, but kind of into it, right? Then we can think about Aries, which is very different from Pisces. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is the planet of anger and irritation and conflict and war and fighting and these kinds of things, redness, right? Like the kind of thing, motivation, it gets you up and wants you to start moving around and doing things, right? The first decan of Aries is one of my favorite images for that is the axe, right? And so the idea is like chopping things in some kind of way. And one of the images that we can use there is the idea of chopping the umbilical cord. So differentiating oneself from the mother and being like, and Aries is often associated with youth and like it's like the first shoots of springtime, right? Like the
Yeah.
like first little couple of leaves, the little baby leaves
Right.
that are on there and all this, like that
Yeah.
kind of thing is often associated with Aries. And so we might think about like a toddler or someone who is 7 years old being like, I got this, mom, and clearly does not got this, you know,
Yeah.
like that
But the
kind of vibe.
confidence. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
amazing confidence. Yeah.
hmm Big confidence, not necessarily big capacity
Right.
with that sort of situation, right?
Mhm.
And so what I feel like is going on here is the difference. So if we, and like, all right, primordial soup, we can think about like being inside the mother, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Like like it's liquid in here, right?
Right.
Like no breath is taking place, none of that. But then at birth, you come out, you get rid of that umbilical cord, and now it's time to be out here doing things in the world and striving, right? You brought up the idea of the of heroism, right? Like I want to go out here and I want to do things, I want to accomplish goals, and I want to be great at what I do, and I want to be the one doing it. I don't want to be here with my mom taking care of stuff for me. I want to be the one out here doing things because I am me and I'm great, right?
Wow.
And so Neptune moving into this area of Aries looks like bringing from the wellspring of dreams into greater consciousness, this idea of like, I want to go out and do me rather than speaking so much about like mysticism and the kind of inherent unity of everything. Like all things are one, sure, great. But what about me is how I feel like it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the vibes here.
Yeah. I
Right.
love
Yeah. So
how.
that Pisces is all things are one, and Aries is, but what about me? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so Neptune as the source of the wellspring of dreams or like the collective unconscious or something like that, it's
Mm-hmm.
starting to bubble up these images of me, of the fresh new growth, war, the getting, all those Aries images.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not borders and boundaries in the way that Saturn likes to do borders and boundaries, but
Mhm.
rather differentiation,
Mm.
Like the sense of like cutting off the thing that connected us and being like, I am me, I am it, I am the one out here doing stuff. And and a lot of times Aries like wants to be a badass too, like I'm better than the other guy is. And so I'm gonna prove that. I'm gonna show that by being a hero, or so I would expect during this time, during the upcoming 14 years while Neptune is in Aries, I would expect a lot of exploration of the hero's journey.
Yeah, yeah.
So does this time, like in both of your opinions, get less confusing because we're moving out of this Pisces like ocean to a more dry Aries, or are we still kind of in a land of like unsure what's next? Like, you know?
hmm I don't think less confusion is on the plate for some time.
Yeah.
Very
So
good. Okay.
Yeah, and maybe,
Right.
maybe we should back up a little bit too. And we've
sure.
talked about Neptune, but we've been talking about this year for a long time. A lot of astrologers have been talking about
Sure.
2025
yeah.
for a long time because all of the outer planets are changing signs, and this is a big deal because
hmm
Neptune only changes its sign every 14 years. Uranus has a long time period. Saturn, 2.5 years. Jupiter changes every year. Pluto just changed its sign, so it counts, but it's that's already happened. It's just moved into Aquarius.
So it's kind of rare that this happens, that all these planets are going to be changing sign in one year.
And one, yes, and so it's
hmm
like everything is changing in a certain way.
hmm
And then
That's
the inner
funny.
planets are like kind of doing lots of retrogrades and
Yeah, I mean,
doing-
and the inner planets are kind of always changing,
right. Yeah.
But they're
They're
in this first
faster.
quarter. There's Mars is retrograde now, and then Mercury and Venus are going to go retrograde. But they do go retrograde,
More frequently
more
anyway.
frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so for the overview, and we'll get more into this in the spring forecast, and do the astrological year ahead. But what do you see, like, what are you excited about with this year with all of these planets changing? Is this like an epochal change in your opinion?
Um,
Yes.
so I think, yeah, so it's worth being with this idea of confusion for a little while because it's such a major, we are moving from historical era to historical era. And as such, then, so you mentioned Uranus changes signs every 7 years or so, and Neptune changes every 14 years or so, and Pluto changes, but this time it's going to be like 20 years. And all of that is changing and is going to take a while to get used to, right? So
Yeah.
like we've been doing Neptune in Pisces for like 14 years, right? Probably don't remember what Neptune in what's the sign before Pisces? Aquarius was like. You probably don't remember what that was like. Even if you were alive and could be like had an adult memory at that time. Like who knows what was going how I felt, what the
I was
wellspring
like
of
a
dreams was
teenager.
like 14
Yeah.
years ago, 17 years ago, you know what I mean? Like just no real memory of that, right? And so it takes a while to get used to. But then there's also the idea of we are now in the age of air, where before we had been in the age of earth. And I've probably explained this on this podcast before, but this is Jupiter and Saturn make conjunctions in signs of the same triplicity or element for a period of 200 years or so. And so we just moved from the period where they were making those conjunctions in earth signs into a period where we're making those conjunctions in air signs. Those eras are 200 years long each. And so even though this last conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that really brought us into the era of air already happened in, what was that? That was late, it was December 2020, I think, right? So already we're 4 years past that, but 4 years ain't shit when it comes to 200. Right?
Yeah.
So we're still at the very beginning. We're not used to it yet. And
Right.
so what we're moving into, and this is super noticeable if you like stop thinking about astrology and math and all that stuff for a second, but just like think about where we actually are in time, then like culturally, historically, then we're in the era of deep fakes, right? No one knows what to do with AI and technology. And as far as that stuff is concerned, it's the wild, wild west out here. We don't have
Yeah.
any real regulations about that. There's no real rules that anyone knows yet because no one knows the landscape. Right. And so what we see here is moving into a new historical era where we don't know what it looks like. And so we're just trying it. We're just
Yeah.
trying stuff out. And the nature of that is to be confused. Right. If
Mm.
your whole principle is fuck around and find out, then you got to do some fucking around before you can understand what the rules of this situation are, like how this place, how this, time and space are the same thing, how this space is shaped, and therefore how to work with oneself in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're in this transition period, and the year
Hmm.
2025 is another of those years where there's like a lot of transitions happening.
Right. And so we don't land in
Yeah, we don't land.
2025.
Right.
We're not in a place where we're like, okay, got it now.
Mm.
But by the end of 2025, that's not happening. So
Yeah.
even though this major shift is happening, what we're like, the main thing is the shift.
Yeah.
Like the change is what's happening right
Yeah.
now. And so we're
Gotcha.
not going to say again.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Oh,
Mhm.
okay. Yeah. So we're not going to get to a place where we're like sure about what's happening. What we're doing now is changing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Right.
so, one of the things on an emotional level that I think is really important, I was talking about like doom and gloom before. Change is scary and hard for people. And by
Yeah.
people, I mean humans. I mean all of us, myself included, right? Change is a difficult thing to do. I have been in situations, for example, where I had to do a breakup that I knew I was in a relationship that I knew wasn't it. And I had to do a breakup and I cried for months about that shit. It was
Yeah.
so difficult and terrible. And I knew that the change was good, but I hated it anyway.
Yeah.
And so and I find this in people in general and dogs and like just in
Mhm.
general, we tend to prefer a kind of stability. We want stuff to work out in the same way that it already has, even if that sucks. And so to be in a moment of change does feel terrifying, does feel like, we can think about death as a kind of transition. So it feels kind of deathly, right? It feels like there's a kind of darkness or, if we think about like being in a landscape where you're unfamiliar, it's a little bit like being in the dark in the woods, right? Not sure what's out there. And there's a lot of fear of the dark. Like, I don't know what's out there. And because I don't know what's out there, then I can imagine lots of terrible things that could possibly be happening. And I have no verification for any of that, but I have freaked myself out now,
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
so that's part of where we are in the landscape. And so when we think about like the feelings that come up and all of the doom and gloom that shows up in forecasting, not only in like astrological, magical, spiritual forecasting, but also political forecasting and all of that sort of stuff, then there's a lot of doom that shows up in that space. And it's not because we're all going to die, it's because we have a fear of the dark.
Hmm.
The good news is that the dark is actually navigable. We can figure it out. And by the end of this 7, 14, 20, 200-year cycle, then we will have shed some light on what's going on. We will be better at navigating this terrain. We are
Mhm.
currently not good at it, but this is an opportunity to upskill.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in 200 years, I mean, we may be alive in different bodies or something, but then there'll be something new to change, because there's always something changing in this plane. But there's a lot of things changing in this year. A lot of stuff is changing. And so it is a time to upskill. Yeah, that's a great thing to talk about too. And
Mhm.
one of the nice things about these changes is Jupiter's changing into its exaltation sign, and it's going to be there for a year, which is
That's right.
really great. And and you're a Cancer ascendant, AC is a Cancer ascendant, so Jupiter and Cancer should be wonderful transits for both of you. It's over my son.
Thank
My
goodness.
son's in tropical Cancer, so I'm looking forward to
Oh
that.
yeah.
And that's a great time to upskill too. I would say, with that
Yeah.
Jupiter.
I am not excited about Jupiter in Cancer yet
Ah,
because we still have Mars retrograde in Cancer to get
yeah,
through.
yeah.
We can sort of forget about that a little bit because Mars is in Leo right now, but not for very much longer, for only like a week more or something like this. And then we've got a whole bunch of Mars in Cancer. It's like 4 months or something like this of Mars retrograde, and then stationing direct, and then moving forward through Cancer. And where Cancer is the sign of Jupiter's exaltation, Cancer is the sign of Mars's fall.
Yeah.
And so it's a situation where, so excuse me, the way that I mentioned exaltation is like being over at your best friend's place where everything is groovy and you don't have any responsibilities. The opposite to that is like being over at like an enemy's place, or like being over at a place where you are so terribly resourced that you can't do the things that you are trying to do. So Mars, for example, wants to go out and differentiate, right? Mars rules Aries. Mars wants to be me and like do stuff out here. Cancer is the
Yeah.
sign of the mother. Mothers don't have the space, the capacity to do me because they got to do us, right?
Mm.
Most important thing for mom is what's going on with baby. And if that
Yeah.
means that I'm not getting no sleep, and if that means that I gotta get up and drive somebody somewhere or something like, then that's what that means. Sorry, homie. Like that's what it is over here, right?
Yeah.
And so Mars can get pretty frustrated about that kind of thing. And when I think about Mars and Cancer, sometimes I think about like mama bear energy,
Hmm.
right? And so Cancer is like the home place, or the thing that is, the nursery is one of my favorite images for Cancer, right? The idea of like hugging up the babies, be they plant babies or human babies or puppies or anything else, right? And they're like creating an environment where they can begin to thrive, it's softer in there than the brutal outside world is. And
Yeah.
so it gives you the ability to like really grow them up and like create a lot of them and this kind of thing. And then put Mars in there and it's threatened in some kind of way, or there is something sharp or dangerous or fights taking place, right? And so mama bear energy is this like, I have to protect this thing that is soft and that means so much to me. And I don't necessarily have a lot of capacity to think about it. What I have is capacity to raise everything to the ground. Fuck all y'all, right?
Yeah.
And so, and that's Mars in Cancer already, right? And then we put Mars retrograde, and Mars retrograde is like extra Marsy. It is, the a way to think about that is it is extremely visible during this time period. So Mars retrogrades happen when they are opposite to the sun, and so that is to say that while the sun is down and the sky is dark and therefore the stars are most visible, then we get Mars all night. And Mars is super bright and red during that time, and so very extra Marsy. So extra Mars that doesn't know what to do with itself and that is like ragey and emotional. And so that looks like a lot to be taking place in this Cancer space, right?
Yeah.
And so while it does ultimately resolve with Jupiter coming through, and Jupiter's probably going to have some salve and some balm, and like things are going to be better and like ready to grow, and like, Jupiter is very good for growing up the babies and this kind of thing. Zeus has many children, right? Like Jupiter is very good for growth and harmony and that sort of stuff in the second half of the year. But this first half of the year looks like it is a pretty rough time for Cancer.
Yeah.
And Cancer's been going through it for some time, like all the way back to 2020 and all this, had eclipses in Cancer, and if you have placements in Cancer, then all of it got by an opposition to Saturn and Pluto, and there was a Mars retrograde in Aries that year, which was square to Cancer stuff. So like, Cancer is going to go through it for some time before we get to this Jupiter. When we come back to the spring and summer, then I will have nice things to say about Jupiter in Cancer. In the meantime, we got to get through some stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got again an angry Mars, emotionally unstable
Hmm.
Mars in Cancer for the rest of the winter and
Hmm.
spring, basically. And he's going to leave Cancer and then we get that Jupiter coming in the summertime. But so Mars is gonna cause all these problems in the home, in the heart, in that Cancer space,
A lot of
Hmm.
anger.
a lot of anger. But then Jupiter will come back up and patch it up, maybe, and grow new things from
Hmm.
those wounds potentially. Yeah, it's like it maybe you could look at it too as like Mars is raising the house, so you can build a new house, or
Hmm.
he's like filling the soil,
Yeah.
and then you can grow
Sure.
new things when Jupiter's coming through. But
Hmm.
when you're if you're building a new house or if you're fixing up your house, first you need to do the destruction. First you need
Demo.
the demo, yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. I really like the tilling the soil image. That's a really good one.
So maybe like a lot of winter sports to like channel that energy, like snowboarding and skiing and like hiking in the snow and snowshoes, whatever, like, is that how
Right,
to get
right. What's
through?
the medicine?
Yeah, what's the
Okay.
medicine?
Yeah, so Mars retrograde. So one of the things about Mars retrograde is that so Mars is the planet of action and motivation and getting out there and doing stuff. And so if it was just Mars in Cancer, then I might think about that. But Mars retrograde, one of the things about retrograde Mars is that it's very Marsy, but also kind of unpredictable, right? It's going backwards and not forward. And so what I have found so far is throughout this Mars retrograde. And one of the things that I find in general with Mars retrogrades is that motivation is difficult to come by and energy can be kind of sporadic. So like I'm pretty into exercise. I run for miles at a time and I like work out and I like to sweat it out. Like since Mars has been retrograde, I've worked out like 4 times or something like that. You know what I mean? From 6 times a week or something like this to like,
Oh,
4 times in 2 months or something like I'm not on top of my shit right now. And so when it comes to doing the Mars retro or the Mars things such as skiing and like sporting events and this kind of thing, for me, it, I have been giving myself a certain kind of grace around that. Like I haven't been super disciplined about it. I haven't been making myself sweat it out. And I just don't have the energy for it. And I find myself being super busy. Like I've got other stuff going on because there's other stuff that is happening here. So I don't necessarily know that, like, if you can sweat it out, then go ahead and go for that. Also, be wary of injury and stuff like that. Like, don't go too hard
okay.
because that's another thing that Mars and unpredictable Mars can give you some
True.
injuries and these kinds of things. So
Maybe
that's something to be aware of.
sauna, like sitting still and sweating it out would be a good
I do
conflict
like the
breaker,
sauna.
right?
Yeah.
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 And maybe that's a personal preference. I love the sauna. I'll sit in there and
Love the
cook.
sauna. Yeah, I love it.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I like that Mars in Cancer or Mars with the moon for a sauna is
Sure.
perfect for that. It's like hot water that's
Yeah.
cleansing and
Yeah.
in a way that's cleansing and transformative in
Mhm.
that aspect of the Mars of the that like fire of transformation, and cleanse.
Totally. Totally.
So I do like that
Yeah.
sauna thing for Mars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So go, yeah, sit in the sauna. But the other piece of medicine that I've been thinking about with Mars retrograde has been like Mars needs a job to do, a goal to accomplish, right? When there's too much Mars, then you get, I think I've probably on this show used the image of the German Shepherd, right? The German Shepherd in the apartment who, when you go away to work, then German Shepherd doesn't know what to do. And so just like tears up furniture and you come back and there's fluff from the pillows everywhere and the toilet paper all over the house and stuff is spilled and all this, right? And it's not because it's a bad dog. It's because dog didn't have a job to do. If you put that same sheep herding dog into a field with sheep, then that dog immediately knows what to do and handles business and works hard and feels better about it, right? So that is a Mars kind of situation. Mars needs a job to do. So with a Mars retrograde where Mars is moving backwards and Mars is uncomfortable at the same time that Mars is moving backwards, then this is a time to think about what am I trying to do? What goals am I trying to accomplish? What aims am I trying to achieve? Do I want to do that? are my goals actually the things that I want to try to do? And is my method or approach to getting there the way to do it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, am I headed in the right direction? Is the goal? And is my actual action, the things that I am actually doing, is that stuff actually going to take me toward the goal? Because a lot of times, you get mired in busy work and you get to, like if you got dreams that you're trying to do, and then maybe you got a job that's like, like maybe you're working too many hours at your job or something like this. And then so that now you have stopped yourself from getting toward your goals because you got mired in some other bullshit that doesn't matter very much. And so I feel like a Mars retrograde is a good time to examine both goals and methods.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think you mentioned in one of your weeklies, like, are you aiming your arrow at the right direction? Like where to, because your goal might be like, say you're hunting, like your goal might be the deer. And so your goal, but yeah, you might be aiming in the wrong direction. And so it's like, how do you get to that goal is also just as important. So it sounds like good winter activities for me, a lot of like journaling and seeking like what is it that I'm really what do I want to see? What kind of shape am I going to create for myself here,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I would say for the whole first half of the year or so, there's going to be a lot of that kind of, it's going to be good to give ourselves space to wiggle around and think with what we're trying to do. And is this approach going to get us to the goal that you actually want? Because so Mars is going to be retrograde for a bunch of Mars is retrograde until I think mid-February. And then Mars starts moving forward again, and then we get Venus moving from Pisces into Aries, and then stationing retrograde in early March, and then coming back through Aries and going into Pisces again. And then actually Mercury does that same motion, and stations retrograde like 1 degree away from the Venus station, and then comes back and does the same thing. And it's worth remembering that Aries is ruled by Mars, right? So the Mars things that you're trying to do are going to be confused throughout the Mars retrograde, and then right when you think you've got something, then you get confused again with Venus and Mercury retrograde.
Very
And
good.
so there, with those retrogrades, we're thinking probably more relationally. Venus cares
Yeah.
very much about relationships. And one thing that I talk to clients about all the time in readings, I do a lot of relationship readings, and it's like the whole thing in a relationship is communication. That's what a relationship is. And so to see Venus and Mercury both retrograde at the same time looks like a moment where it's like, okay, what are these relationships? And you can look in your own natal chart to see where Aries is in your chart and maybe like zero in a little bit on that. And if you want to go to ZamboniFunk.com and get a reading, then I'll be happy to rock that for you. But the Aries things are likely to be deeply confused about orientation during the Mars retrograde, and then how to communicate with relationships and build teamwork, coalition, community, togetherness. Like that bit gets confused immediately after the Mars retrograde happens.
Mm.
And the thing is, we're doing confusion during that period because that's when Neptune moves into Aries, right? And that's right there at that same spot. So I want to differentiate and I want to do the thing. Like I got aims, I got goals that I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be out here on my little hero's journey, but maybe I can't. This is the 7-year-old who like wants to be out here. Stop helping me, mom. And then like, like tripping all over his damn self and doesn't know how to live. Right.
Yeah.
And so maybe we got to come back into the primordial soup for a little bit and, check out what are we really doing with all this, before we can actually make moves.
Yeah. And that's at that 0 degrees Aries point is very important this spring, this winter and spring seems. So I'm excited to look at that Aries ingress chart when we come back in March and really see what's going on there. Because that 0 degrees Aries is in like Uranian astrology, that 0 degrees Aries is a very important point. That's like a world point where anything on that point is important for the whole world. And if you're like you're gonna publish a book that you want to be read by everybody in the world, that's a good time to do it. 0 degrees Aries rising or something like that. But that 0 degrees Aries is a seems like a critical point for this spring.
Word. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say I wouldn't zero it into 0 degrees of Aries,
Okay.
like first decan
Yeah.
of Aries, last decan of Pisces, that 20-degree
Yeah.
period there looks like it's super busy because at the same time we got nodes changing signs. So we've got the
Right.
north node in Aries right now, and the north node is going to move into Pisces, and so it's going to do that same retrograde motion from Aries to Pisces. And then Saturn is there at the end of Pisces, and Saturn's going to make a little toe dip into Aries in what is this, the second half of the year. It's only a little bit this year. Well, it's only going to be like 3 months or something like that of Saturn in Aries, but we're going to get this little toe dip of Saturn into Aries, and Saturn's going to be approaching that Neptune there also. And so now we're thinking about Saturn, the boundaries, the restrictions, the structure to things right there up next to Neptune, who doesn't do boundaries or restrictions. And so this is going to be real tough on the Saturn thing. So again, it's just like all of the confusion, just one
And
thing after the
Saturn
next.
Saturn is debilitated in Aries as well. So
Yes.
there's some
Mm,
problem.
Again, this is the fall.
Yeah.
mm,
And from a Vedic perspective, I'm looking at people's charts and seeing transits going on. I'm looking at this Saturn North Node or Rahu conjunction that's happening in the spring
March.
at the end of it's actually happening, I think, in the beginning of April. But it's going to be perfecting throughout March. They're going to
Mhm.
be getting closer and closer together. And it's a really those, for the Vedic astrology, those are the two most malefic planets, Rahu, the North Node, and Saturn, and they're both wind air planets, and so that's like a wind storm when they're together, and
Mm,
there's like ghosts associated with that combination, and a lot of trauma and that kind of stuff happening. So that's another conjunction that I'm interested, like seems like a really potent and potentially a spot in the sky that there's going to be a lot of stuff coming up from, stirring up a windstorm, stirring up dust in that
mhm.
spot. Um, and that's also happening exactly on the um the eclipse. Let me just show this real quick. Here's just this is the chart we use as a North Indian style chart. This is an eclipse from on 3/29, the end of March, which we'll probably cover more in the Aries ingress. But we've got Moon Sun together, Rahu and Saturn's at 29:59. So he's just about to enter into, you know, for us, he's going to be entering into Pisces. But they're going to be Saturn and Rahu are going to be conjunct there in sidereal Pisces. But that's going to be a pretty crazy few weeks there between right after the like during the eclipses in March, and then the next 2 weeks until the Saturn Rahu conjunction. But that's just that's one thing. But we'll talk about that more in the Aries ingress. So yeah, there's a lot happening in that end of that last decan of Pisces, first decan of Aries. Period.
Mhm.
That space in the sky of
Mhm.
tropical around tropical 0 degrees Aries. So
Mhm.
it's definitely if you've got an Aries rising or if you've got a lot of planets in that area of the sky, it's definitely I don't know, it could be fun. It could be fun.
Yeah, it looks really busy and unsure.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
About 8 to 10 degrees in either direction from that 0 degrees area. It looks like there's like a lot happening
Hmm.
and difficult to know exactly what to make of it.
Right.
So, like, it's good to like maintain a little grace for yourself, for others, again, depending on where this lands in your chart and this kind of thing. Like, it looks like a moment where there is plenty confusion and lots of like gusto, a lot of like, I want to do it. I want to get out here and do stuff. And then maybe it's just not working the way that you thought it would, the way that you hoped it would. Like we're out here in the dark, right? So you thought it was going to look a certain way, and then it didn't look that way. And so there's a question about like what does it actually look like? And if it's going to look like that, then how does my plan have to change?
Yeah, yeah. But plans in a way are also downstream from those shapes and those images coming out of the Neptune collective unconscious. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're
Mm-hmm.
like really going back as Mars is going retrograde, going back and looking at your motivations, what your desires, your goals. As Venus is going retrograde, look at those desires. Like what do you want? And Mercury, how you're communicating them. This seems like a great time to be looking back and really making sure you're on the right track, so that in this new era, as everything's changing, you know what you want, and you are ready to go for it, as as the new world is emerging. The
Mm-hmm.
old world
Mm-hmm.
is being, you know, falling apart to a certain degree.
Yeah, the old world is falling apart. I like that. That is a certain, when I think about Saturn moving into Aries, where it is fallen, right? And so this is Saturn in a place where Saturn is terribly resourced for doing the Saturn things. What Saturn wants to do is create boundaries and walls and restrictions and structures and stuff like that. It's a little bit like trying to build a wall with cooked spaghetti. Like,
Yeah.
it's not your favorite building material for that, right? But it's what you have. It's what you have available. And so, like, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna work this out? And so what I have been thinking about here is, and then so like, and even not Saturn in Aries, like Saturn at the end of Pisces. Okay, so that's Saturn in the deep ocean, and it's Saturn with the North Node as well. And so the North Node, in one of the ways that I like to think about the North Node, it's an eclipse point, and so it's one of the places where there is shadow instead of light. Right. So
Yeah.
that's what an eclipse is. An eclipse is when the sun or the full moon, objects that are normally shining brightly, are instead in shadow, and that casts a certain kind of confusion on the landscape. So again, we're in this darkness and don't know how to deal with the darkness, right? And so there's a kind of confusion that is associated with the North Node there. And so Saturn then becoming confused about like how to generate structures or systems that function appropriately and this kind of thing. To my mind, or I often think of Saturn as a manager. To my mind, it's the sense that systems and rules are not functioning. And so the rules stop being the rules. The official rules are not the rules anymore. For several years, I've been in these forecasts, I've been talking about how the leadership figures have been just like one thing after the next. Then like the emperors, the kings are like taking hits all over the place. And so there have been a gang of assassinations, but then also just like the idea of imperial authority, it seems like such bullshit to almost everybody at this point, right? And so when I think one of the things that we're likely to see with Saturn in Aries, especially Saturn in Aries with Neptune, is the rules are not the rules. So the official rules are like whatever they are, right? And maybe you need to pay lip service to those rules and like say the thing that you need to say, right? But then what actually happens is more on the black market. There's a certain like piracy to it. Like, there's a sense of, you know, if it were a fair fight, then you might see a certain kind of outcome. But it's not a fair fight, it's the real fight. And so it's the difference between being in a fight where there are rules and there's a referee there and the referee has legitimate standing, or are you in a bar and anything is possible, right? Like you can break a bottle and now you've got a weapon. You can eye gouge, you can kick balls. Like there are no rules in here except don't get cut by the other guy, right? So like it's not to say that there are no rules, right? It's just that the rules are not the official rules. The actual rules of the situation are emergent, right? So like if somebody breaks a bottle and has a sharp bottle, then now the rule is don't get cut by that guy. So now you've got a situation where you're thinking about how much distance do I need to have, and like is around me that I like, do I need to pick a chair up, which is bigger than that or something, right? Like these become the ways to engage in that space rather than like, okay, well, he's got this bottle over there, but like it's against the rules for him to cut me, so I'm gonna trust him to not cut me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's a dumb way to engage in that environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
And that's an important thing to maybe talk about a little bit too, is like, not trusting the rules, but also not trusting what you see, that this is again there's you can't trust information in this time period.
yeah, there's no rules with the media. There's no rules with like, I think about the police, like where they're on the books, they're supposed to like serve and protect, but they
For a lot of
kill
people, they don't.
and yeah.
Yeah.
So that's like one thing, but also like in this time of confusion, I also think about like our own responsibility to like rewrite what we want to see and rewrite, the structures that's falling. Like we know what didn't work, but like what are we building? Like what kind of story are we creating as a collective? Like, yes, for ourselves on a personal level too, but like what is this new structure of society going to look like?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's something about that I think Neptune and Aries is likely to support over this long 14-year period. The word that I've been thinking with there is intrepid, right?
Mm.
So like there's something like heroic was the word that sort of like led me there, but if we're in this new landscape that is largely dark and shrouded, then there is something heroic about being like going out on an intrepid journey and being like, I'm gonna try stuff.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
try to your point, I'm gonna try to build something that is better than the thing that I came up with, right? Like when I was a child, and then I noticed that the systems were corrupt and terrible, and I wanted to burn it all to the ground, and like that it isn't not really feasible, but I can build something. I have within my capacity the capability to build something, to do something new. And so how am I going to do that? And it's going to take some going out here and trying stuff and,
Yeah.
being willing to your point, Isaac, about you can't trust information. It's not that you can't trust any information, right? It's that you have to learn, because you're going to be awash in information. There's going to be news coming in. There's going to be people talking about stuff. There's going to be different ways to think about stuff. You can't not engage in information.
No.
And in fact, there's a certain sense of like, it is intrepid to go out into the dark and try stuff, but it is similarly unsafe to stay put. Can't stay here because the wave is coming, and so it's going to crash down, it's going to destroy everything. I can't just pretend like the official rules are the rules, right? I have to do something else. And so since we are awash in all of this information, then it's like the upskilling that I was talking about before. We need to improve our ways of relating to information. And so that means that we need to get better at spotting bullshit, deep fakes, biases, fake news, all the rest of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And get good at synthesizing information that has come in that we deem as good information. So it's going to be important to separate good and bad information. And it's going to be important to, separating good and bad information makes it seem like there is good information and there is bad information. And maybe at the polls that's true, but more important, I think a lot about like I listen to a lot of commentators who I disagree with because I want to hear their perspective, and sometimes they have a point.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain sense of like listening to wrong information can bring you toward a better understanding, so long as you are able to put it through a processing mechanism that brings you closer to a kind of truth.
Yeah.
Since like the truth, the capital T truth probably doesn't exist, but a set of information that is useful in the dark does exist.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and everybody has their own biases. You know,
Hmm.
you can't there in a way there is not any good information in terms of like this is good. There's good in terms of useful, you
Hmm.
know, and for it to be useful, you need to know where all the biases are, including your own.
Mm.
Totally.
And
You
and
don't
so
have
I
to agree.
right.
You don't have to agree with what the cops are telling you to do, but you need to know what the cops told you to do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then that's why I think, you know, this winter, you know, this is really we're doing a brief overview of the 2025, but really this is the winter forecast. And the winter forecast is really all about uh that Mars retrograde, Mars going through Cancer, Mercury and Venus retrograde. And to me that brings back to going back to and introspecting, seeing what you really want, seeing what you really want, and then what your strategy is, so that in this new world where everything is changing, you're ready to move with the waves.
Hmm.
You know?
Hmm. I would see maybe this first quarter as a time when we are likely to be, with that Mars retrograde in Cancer, we are likely to be touched in uncomfortable ways in sensitive spots.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
so this is maybe a time to use that as an experience to learn from. So when I get touched in this uncomfortable way in this sensitive spot, what is my move? Like, what's the thing that I just like, what's my knee jerk reaction to that? What's my mama bear, like, I have to destroy everything situation, right? And so
Yeah.
I can learn that about myself, what my reaction is to that. I can see how that goes for me. And then and then maybe like spend the retrogrades time, we've got these Venus retrogrades and Mercury retrogrades and all of that, maybe spend that time brainstorming, okay, well, what are some other options that I have here?
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think that's a great. This is maybe a good place to wrap it up. I'm excited to come back in March and do like a thorough Aries ingress and like look at what's changing in that spring quarter and in the rest of the year, because it's in a way we are kind of in that calm before the storm too. But
Don't fall off the bed.
sorry, our dog.
Hear you. Someone just fell off the bed.
Okay,
Okay.
Well, this is
that's a
also
real good Mars in Cancer image, or Mars retrograde in Cancer. Like, I'm so comfortable. Oh my God, just touch my belly until I fall off the fucking bed. Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
got,
are there
got a little carried away in my heart.
Yeah. I don't
too
know if you
comfortable?
remembered what he looked like a year ago, but he was just a little fluff ball when he
Yeah,
stopped.
he's so big these
Well,
days.
yeah.
Yeah. Now this is him. That's
He's
pretty
he's so legit. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. The
Yeah.
best man who ever lived.
I know, he's just the best.
Yeah, except for when he poops in the bathroom.
Yeah. Except for that.
That's
That's
part of being the best man. Sorry, dog. I don't know what to tell you.
yeah. Okay.
Not everyone's perfect. It could be perfect.
He can't be perfect. It would be too much if he actually was completely potty trained, you know.
If you had asked me before we started if the bathroom was the right place to poop, I would have said yes.
Right?
No, just not on the floor. Not on the floor. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So is there anything that you'd like to talk about or bring up before we call it a year?
I don't think so. I don't want to call it a year. Like, we got to get through this first quarter, which is going to be hella confusing, and the first half of the year, honestly. So
Yeah.
we will come back to all this. I'm sure that, we will have some experiences. We will have more to say as we
Yeah.
move forward. But yeah, I think this is a good place for us to start.
Okay. Awesome. Well, as always, thanks for being on the show, Zamboni.
Thank you all for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.